first of all explain that the international institutions like the World Bank Group and International Monetary Fund, they do periodic regular reviews of their client countries. So World Bank does a 6-monthly review called Pakistan Economic Development Update, and the IMF does a review under the program and Article 4, which we have signed with them. We are currently under a standby arrangement. So I will very quickly see what they are saying, although what they are saying is mostly a repeat of many of us which we have been saying, but they are doing it in one report form. So if I just summarize, the both institutions think that Pakistan's growth will remain way below our potential. Basically, World Bank says that it will be slightly below 2%, whereas IMF think that Pakistan's economic growth in the year 23-24 might touch 2.7%. And what will drive this growth is basically, that banking sector has good profits and there is a cotton crop which looks better, and that can yield some of the returns. Similarly, when I look at this analysis, both reports highlight the challenges and risks to Pakistan, particularly on macroeconomic stability. What we mean by macroeconomic stability is that there is a huge risk of a very narrow tax base, and Pakistan has not been able to tax the sectors like retail and property and agriculture. So Pakistan's tax to GDP ratio remains around 10%. So IMF also suggests that to expand it, and World Bank also suggests that to expand it. Whereas, both institutions, particularly IMF, thinks that the inflationary pressures might slightly go down to mid 20% in the next financial year. That is relatively good news, but still having 26% inflation is a very high number for Pakistan as compared to other South Asian countries. So what are the key risks for Pakistan, what we need to understand from these reports? The risk is, a very large fiscal deficit. And we need to understand that the budget deficit means what? What happens is that if Pakistan does not control its expenditure remains very high and the budget deficit goes around 7.8%. That is about 4% more than the prescribed recipe of IMF, which says keep it between 4 to 5%. Now this additional deficit, how it will be financed? There will be a huge financing requirement to pay for it. By 7.8%, it actually means something like 8 trillion rupees, whereas our total, tax collection target is around 9 trillion rupees. So if Pakistan spends, our tax collection and other inflows into paying our debt servicing, we are not left with much. We cannot borrow much because IMF says that the debt to GDP ratio is almost touching very high at the red line of 82%. What the last government did was that since they could not borrow externally because the IMF program was not agreed, they started borrowing heavily from domestic banks. It had two repercussions. Because of high interest rate, Pakistan's debt servicing went up exponentially. Second is that private sector credit squeezed because government borrowed everything. So the business activities basically slowed down. And this is the root cause of our inflation, because when government continues to borrow and they don't have enough tax collection and economic activity, that results into things getting expensive for people, because government tries and extract money from people from indirect taxes, and also the interest rates go up and the prices of commodities do not get stable. Now with these findings, the second big risk which IMF has indicated is Pakistan's debt profile and debt management, because Pakistan is one of the debt stressed countries. Debt stressed country means that a country which spends more than 50% of its budgetary resources in servicing the debt. Now Pakistan is spending almost 100%. Now the question is, can we cut down expenditure meaningfully and basically bring the deficit down? At the same time, can we expand the tax net to these sectors which have been indicated time and again by many of us, and now IMF is saying, World Bank is saying that, bring taxation to everybody who's earning. You cannot give exemptions, you cannot give subsidies, you cannot do zero ratings. Pakistan basically has been patronizing and, protecting lots of sectors. It is the time to bring them in the tax net. And basically they think that 80% of tax collection can go up if we do a structural change and bring these new sectors, in the tax net. Third thing, which is very critical for Pakistan, is that we have a very large young population. Now, what happens is that if fiscal deficit remains out of control, where would the money come to develop this nation? Health, education, skills development, export competitiveness. We need to invest in 2-3 sectors like, productivity needs to go up in the agriculture sector. We need to have value addition in the IT sector. Now, research and, the infrastructure money, where would this come from? Our investment to GDP ratio is very low, which is around 14%. And it is highly recommended that we basically, take measures and open up Pakistan for investors to, have some inflows, preferably in dollar terms, to take this. So investment is critical, export competitiveness is critical. Now, I will go to, actually, we can go on in these numbers. What are the, key structural risks to Pakistan's economy? Because of that, Pakistan remains in a prolonged recession. But what we need as Pakistanis to look at it is that what is stopping us? What is the binding constraint that we have not been able to basically take that path with lots of other Asian countries have taken and basically are growing, at above 7% for the past 10 years or so. We should also be cognizant that the future global growth is likely to come from Asia, and particularly driven by 2 countries, which is China and India, and thirdly, East Asia. Now, Pakistan should take advantage of this, growth around us, but where are we stuck? Now, that's a fundamental question that Pakistan has failed to, change the structure of economy, which is not good enough to actually grow at a level that 240 million, population can have decent job and economic opportunities in this country. So what we are struggling at the moment is, obviously, everybody would say, one is our political instability, continued political instability that leads to a big gap in economic policy making, and that gap also leads to inconsistencies in policy. So to me, it's the fundamental flaw that an inconsistent policy is not acceptable to investors. Second part, basically, if you look at it, is the capability of our bureaucracy to actually formulate cutting-edge policies. We have not invested in bureaucracy to make policies which are in, which can compete with Cambodia and Bangladesh and Vietnam and other progressive, Asian nations. That is where we are lacking, because we keep on doing projects, we keep on doing administrative measures, but we fail to bring, a structural policy shift here. Third thing, obviously, is that what investors are looking at is the deterioration in law and order and, some of the risks of terrorism coming in the border regions, because that can destabilize a country in a big way. Now, these are some of the mega constraints which Pakistan can only address if we have a stable government, we have a legitimate government, and we have a team which is qualified, which has exposure, which has seen the other countries, and that will give confidence to the market. You have seen, because of administrative measures, rupee dollar parity is, changing towards our favor, because lots of people were taking advantage of weak capacity of regulatory institutions. What Pakistan needs is that we need to look at our fault lines very clearly in light of these reports. Our fault line basically is our fiscal side, which is expenditure management, and our fiscal policy, where we fail to bring, number of people and sectors in the tax net. We need to very clearly have a policy to cut down the size of the government and save expenditure, because the current size is not at all feasible. World Bank report has also indicated to review, basically look at the federation and provincial finances under the National Finance Commission. What happens is that provinces get most of the funds, but they don't have the capability. So Pakistan needs to look at, what to pass on to provinces, and federation should take a smaller role or balance out these things, because this is not sustainable. Third thing is our power sector, which everybody, speaks about, that the circular debt, both in electricity and gas, continues to increase because of inefficiencies, because of theft, because of expensive production. So we need to fix that thing ASAP. Third key challenge for Pakistan's structural shift is to move towards competitive export base. That will take 5 to 10 years, but we need to stop subsidizing sectors which are unproductive, which cannot compete in the global economy, and we need to shift resources to winners. We need to pick winners like value-added agriculture, like information technology, like value-added textiles, rather than keep on doing very basic products which are going. Now, these things are known, but Pakistan, in my opinion, cannot very clearly thinks that the underlying risk remains, even if we manage to do structural adjustment in the next program which we take. We will need to do the, inbuilt these weaknesses of changing the structure of economy. When we say structural reforms, that is changing the structure of economy. And that is where I think one needs to take government. Its role needs to be reduced. We need to give more role to private sector, and all by deregulating. We have seen telecom sector, we have seen banking sector, and some of the highways which were taken out of the traditional government control, and that basically gave decent results to Pakistan. So we need to take a step back and let private sector take the lead. And finally, I would say that pick up priorities. You cannot do everything. At least take power sector and export competitiveness and your fiscal reforms as a top priority, and show the world that you can do it. Nobody from outside will come and help us do it, because we have much larger future challenges, like the risk of climate change, which is a huge challenge to our agriculture, our water resources, livelihoods of the poor. So Pakistan needs to stand up on its own feet, open up investment climate so that investors feel comfortable, and also, deregulate from a very centralized control state. There's far too much state in Pakistan, which actually, because of lack of its capability, is a binding constraint to our growth. I would recommend these things. Don't do many things, do few things. Interim government should, basically plan and design. Government should implementing under this special investment, facilitation council or some other arrangement, so that a signal can go that Pakistan is on the path of stability and future economic growth, which will be sustainable.